so cold this morning, I'd like to take you back to Florida with me. I had the privilege of serving as the youth minister years ago at the Church of the Resurrection in Longwood, Florida, a suburb just north of Orlando. And all the kids, my primary school was Lake Brantley High School, and all of the kids that were the good kids went to the other Episcopal church. And I got everybody else. We had the Bad News Bears youth group, which probably matched me because I was pretty much the Bad News Bears youth pastor. I had the kids that, I'd get a call at night because they had been kicked out of their house. I had the kids, the ladies I would be picking up from the women's clinic late at night without their parents' knowledge. I was the one that testified once or twice at hearings and showed up, to a juvenile detention and all that. We had quite an interesting youth group. One summer, we had an opportunity to do 2 events very close in time. I'd like to take you with us to those events. There was a program by the Episcopal Church to take people onto farms and groves in the central part of Florida to experience what it was like to work, not just to own, but to actually work in a grove or in a farm next to migrant farm workers. Has anybody ever done that? Yeah, really. Scott's done that because he's a youth minister as well. Very few people ever work next to the folks that actually pick the food, the farm-to-table movement. Well, no one ever gets to the farm. And so I took our youth group out for 5 days. Really interesting. Brutally hot. Probably 11 to 12 to 13 hours a day of work. These were basically indentured foreign nationals from Central and South America, from Cuba, from Ecuador, from El Salvador, and they came for only one reason. They came so that their kids could be schooled in American schools and have American health care. And they were willing to sacrifice their lives, basically, to work, and they felt privileged to do it so that their children could have a better life. Now, our kids had never been in this context, ever. They were expecting to find miserable, bitter, and really wounded people. They were shocked to go into the community center on this farm. There were maybe 20, 30 kids of the migrant farm workers. There was one television. If all the kids didn't agree on what TV channel to watch, guess what? Do you know? Didn't go on. One phone. They had to share. They had never seen people thank God for water with ice cubes in it about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They never even thought about this. They'd never considered that a peanut butter and jelly sandwich would taste like the joys of heaven itself after you've been out working with your hands for hours and hours. They had never seen people pray so hard. When these people prayed, they prayed hard. They prayed long, they prayed earnest prayers for simple things like health, for gratitude for their food. They were expecting to meet miserable people because they knew these people were poor. They had no voice in any government. No one gave a darn about them. And they met incredibly joyful people. And it really upended our group. They weren't ready for them. And as a matter of fact, when I asked them night after night, when we'd sit together and review the day, they'd say to me, we've never even considered that these people existed. And we're learning so much about God through them. It was an interesting week. About 2 weeks later, there was a big event in Orlando at one of the convention centers. There was a show in town, a group of people called the Power Squad. Has anybody ever heard of the Power Squad? You all are too fine. no way you know about any of these people, and you're not from Florida. Hundreds of kids, youth groups from all over Central Florida, descended on the Orlando Convention Center to meet the Power Squad. I didn't know a whole lot about it, but it sounded kind of cool. Kept my kids off the street for one night, so we trucked them in and sat, and out on the stage walked one of the biggest men I've ever seen in my life. And he tells a story. And he was a convict, he was convicted, he was sentenced in Florida's system, kind of brutal. And he met the Lord through a prison ministry, gave his life to Jesus, and he started working out in prison. And he realized that God was trying to make him strong. And he basically said, God showed me love in such a powerful way, and he took an iron bar. And as he's talking, he puts the bar on his back and wraps it, bends it around his shoulders. And he said, God showed me love. And he takes off the bar and he's bending into the form of a heart. He said, that's how strong God's love was for me in prison. And then another guy came out bigger than the first guy. He was in prison, same thing, same story. And he says, do you know what I used to do to the Bible? I used to do it. And he took an Orlando phone book. Yellow Pages 2. And as he's talking, he actually pulled the phone book and ripped it in two. I don't know if you know this. You have to be incredibly strong to do something like that. And he's talking while he's doing it. He said, I used to treat the Bible like that, but not anymore. Now I just do this with the Bible. And he just opened the Bible. Then a third guy came out, bigger than the first two. And the third guy says, I was trying to hold in all this stuff in my life. I had to let it go. God was trying to unchain me. And when he says that, a sheriff's deputy walked on stage and handcuffed him. He said, it kind of changed just like this, but God's love is more powerful than that. And another deputy walked up and double cuffed him. A third deputy, 3 sets of handcuffs. And he says, God's love is just so explosive, I couldn't hold it in. And this guy ripped apart 3 Orange County Sheriff's deputies' handcuffs right there on stage. Now my kids were really paying attention. Then a fourth guy came out. And the fourth guy says, God's love just lifted me right up out of my terrible life, and he just raised me up. And there was a bench on stage. And he started inviting kids to come down and sit on the bench. Right? You know what's about to happen. Well, my stupid kids, of course, raised their hand. So one of my kids was trotting down, a couple of other kids. There's about 6 or 7 kids on there, right? And this guy is literally able to lay under the bench and bench press this bench and lift all those kids up in the air. This is the Power Squad. And they're talking about the strength of Jesus and how God can lift you up, and you have to be morally straight in life. You cannot make the mistakes that they made. Man, and every kid walked out of there. I don't know, these little 6th grade kids with a concave chest, they're walking out like this, And they feel strong in God, I've never seen anything like it. And so I talked to them, and they said, well, the youth group said, what is it? We saw migrant farm workers 2 weeks ago. No one had any use for them whatsoever except to work. They had no voice, no power, nothing. And then we see the Power Squad. And they looked at me and they said, Brooks, which is it? And I looked at them and I said, I don't know. It started me on a probably 25-year reflection in the Bible. Do you feel yourself today getting pulled in the scripture readings? The Bible's intensive on this. It's one of the key discernments of the Christian faith. How do we follow God? Are we supposed to be the power team? The Power Squad? Or is it about a different way? What does Paul say to those Corinthians? The Corinthians were one of the wealthiest cities of the ancient world. They were always looking for the best, the brightest, the strongest, the most interesting, the most beautiful. Paul was trained for that. His whole life had been spent being prepared to be the very best. And what does he have to say to those Corinthians? I decided to know nothing amongst you except a crucified Messiah. I did not speak anything to you with rhetoric, with lofty words. I didn't come like one of those wise sages that you pay, I'm translating loosely here, and watch on late night television or on the internet. He said, I came to you in utter weakness. Paul's like broken when he's writing to the Corinthians. He says, God's going to just have to make do with what I got. And right now, it's not very much. I decided to know nothing amongst you except Christ and Him crucified. As a matter of fact, Paul wrote in another place, and he hears God say to him in another letter, God says to Paul, my power is perfected through your weakness. He's shattered. And God says, now we can do something. That's Paul. You heard it in today's reading. Now come over here to Jesus in the power squad. What does Jesus say to you as a church? You're a city on a hill. Everyone should be looking up to you. You're a light. You don't put a light under a bushel. You take the bushel off so everyone can see it. That's the kind of church we're supposed to be. Jesus, this isn't Paul. This is Jesus saying, those of you that like cuisine, I know some people like food in the room. Like, can you imagine eating a wonderful meal when there's not enough salt? What's it taste like? Blah. Jesus is saying, what kind of a church is there? What kind of a church are we if you have the message, but there's no spice, there's no sizzle on that steak, right? You ever been to a church, you just walk in, it's like, blah. Blah. Jesus said, don't be a church like that. He said, be that city on the hill. There goes Jesus out of the room right now. Be that city on the hill. Be that light of the world. Be that salt in your community. People actually watch us. Do you know that? People watch you because you go to church. Do you remember back in the ancient days when we had a video rental store in Edwards? Does anybody remember that far back? We used to have to explain this to our younger people. That's when we used to actually take out a video, physically and take it home. Do you know that people used to follow me through the video store? This is a true story. They were watching to see which aisle I went down. This is great. I used to kind of lead them down the aisle and go. Right? Yeah, it's the same thing happened in the magazine kind of thing of the bookworm. It happens today. People actually watch. What am I going to do? Well, guess what? They watch me, but they watch you too. Most interesting conversation I had years ago was with a guy who said to me, I'll never go to your church. I said, why not? He said, oh, I know about your church. He said, everybody knows about your church. He said, there are a bunch of hypocrites in your church. I said, really? He said, yeah, Father, you see him on Sunday morning, but I see him on Saturday night. I said, let me tell you something. You have no idea where I spend my Saturday nights. I see him all the time. I said, there are no hypocrites in our church. We say the confession every 7 days in our church. Some of us say it a lot more than that. I said, there's no ivory tower here. If you're this church looking for an ivory tower, you're in the wrong place. I said to him, what we are is a spiritual machine. We're right off the front line. And God goes, tick, 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 tick. And you get up and you go back out into the world. 7 days later, I kid you not, that man was in our church. Fascinating. Friends, which is it? Do we get to be the power squad? Do we get to be Paul talking about weakness? Do we get to be those migrant workers? How do we follow God? Can I tell you that I was so clear yesterday, standing right here during Barney's funeral, that we got to be for a moment a city on the hill. There are all these people that didn't come to church. Their hearts are broken, and they're coming here, and you all are ministering to them. That we're speaking a word. At that reception, I couldn't go 5 feet, and it wasn't because I was talking to you. I was talking to all these people that wanted to talk to me because they just had questions about everything we said in the service. I thought, this is where we get to be salty a little bit here. We get to kind of leaven the loaf a little bit here. I love those receptions. I don't get to eat anything, but it's awesome. And then I thought, as I was going to bed last night, I thought about looking right here into the eyes of Carrie and Reese, who's turned 6 yesterday. And during all those eulogies, I had to look into Reese's eyes. And I realized that everything that Paul ever wrote about being weak and broken, I saw in the eyes of a little 6-year-old girl. And God's power had to show up, or else none of us would have made it through that service. Friends, which is it? The power squad, or the migrant workers and Paul and Jesus on the cross? You know my answer now, don't you? Which is it?
Both.
We're Anglicans. We don't ever have to choose either or. The answer is yes. It's both. Of course. Are we called to be that city on the hill and salt and light in this community? You bet. Do people get to watch us and ask if we walk the walk? You bet. And do we preach anything other than Christ crucified? You better never hear anything else. The answer is both. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.